Hey guys, tonight we're heading east, deep into the heart of the early Islamic world around the 8th century. The desert winds are soft, the sky is a dusky wash of stars, and the walls of the courtyard are cool to the touch. You're there too, padding barefoot across woven rugs, still warm from the day's sun. In the distance, someone's mixing date syrup into goat's milk. Closer still, a neighbor is raising her voice just slightly enough to be heard, but not enough to be improper. You pause at the entrance to a modest home in Basra. Clay walls, wooden doors, a single oil lamp flickering inside. You're not here for tea or gossip, though those are always on offer. You're here to witness something quieter, but just as powerful. Divorce. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me where you're listening from and what time it is where you are.
Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together.
There is no ceremony,
No rice throne, no lawyers with flashy robes or judges banging gavels.
just a man, a woman,
And if it comes to it, 3 small words. I divorce you. Except, not quite like that. In Arabic, it's talaq, a word loaded with
finality, tradition, and enough legal baggage to fill a camel caravan. In the early Islamic Caliphates, saying those 3 words, especially in the correct way, was often enough to end a marriage, sometimes instantly, sometimes with a few caveats and a date-stamped parchment. You might be picturing a hasty temper tantrum, followed by someone grabbing their sandals and storming off. But the truth, much more careful, because in this era, roughly 700 to 900 CE, divorce wasn't seen as failure. It was just one of the possibilities, like harvests failing or caravans changing routes. Unfortunate, yes. Shameful, not always.
In fact, divorce was built into the design.
Islamic jurisprudence, particularly under the guidance of the Quran, and early scholars like Imam Malik and Abu Hanifa, allowed divorce to be part of life. It wasn't exactly encouraged, but it wasn't forbidden either. It was regulated. It had rules, procedures, paperwork. It even had waiting periods and property considerations. In many ways, it was more organized than some modern systems. Mainstream fact. The early Islamic legal system formalized divorce through clear principles, particularly under the 4 Sunni madhab's legal schools. A man could initiate talaq with verbal declaration, while the woman could pursue khul, a mutual divorce in which she returned her dowry back to the house. A husband stands near the courtyard, maybe pacing, maybe pretending not to pace. His wife is seated quiet but not timid. She's holding her prayer beads not because she's praying, but because it keeps her hands from clenching. He says it once, I divorce you. Then silence. That's not enough. One pronouncement is only step 1, according to most scholars of the time. The husband had to wait. Not days, months, 3 menstrual cycles, or in the language of the era, 3 full tour periods. Why? Because life is rarely linear. And sometimes people change their minds. That waiting time is called iddah, a window, a buffer, a moment for clarity. During iddah, the couple could reconcile. No new vows needed, just agreement, just return. But if he repeated the statement again after iddah, and again after that 3 declarations in 3 separate clean cycles, the divorce was final, permanent, at least until she married another man and divorced him too. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Quirky tidbit. Some men hoping to speed things along would say, I divorce you 3 times in one breath. But jurists argued no shortcuts. Intent mattered. Timing mattered. And yes, tone mattered too. Shouting it during a fight, legally valid, but spiritually frowned upon. Imagine now the neighbors listening just over the wall. Not because they're nosy. Okay, yes, they are nosy. But also because divorce wasn't hidden behind closed doors. It echoed through the alleyways. In a culture where family meant survival and reputation could determine everything, from trade deals to marriage prospects, who was divorcing, whom was, well, public record. No newspapers needed. The woman in our story, let's call her Aisha, doesn't cry. Not tonight. She's not heartbroken. She's tired. Tired of the arguments about her father's inheritance. Tired of pretending not to care that he keeps forgetting her birthday again. Tired of praying for patience when what she really wants is peace. She doesn't beg. She doesn't plead. She simply says, "Tell me again." He repeats the phrase, slower this time, like the weight of it is catching up. She nods, and the lamp flickers. Historians still argue whether the triple talaq was abused or misunderstood, whether men used it to control women, or whether women quietly encouraged it when they'd had enough, whether the waiting periods were oppressive or a chance to breathe. But in this house on this night, it feels like both, a release, a recalibration, maybe even a new beginning. Later, Aisha will return to her family. She'll live with her sister for a while, trade gossip for lentils, and maybe laugh again when someone reads her old love letters aloud in a dramatic voice. She might remarry, she might not, but tonight she ties her scarf, just so gathers her things and steps into the warm night air. The sky overhead is clear. The air smells faintly of cardamom and dust, and for the first time in a long while, she doesn't feel like a wife. She just feels like herself. The air outside Aisha's courtyard is warmer than usual, sticky with the last breath of summer. As she steps past the threshold, barefoot, still, her sandals tucked under one arm, there's no fanfare, no procession, just the quiet hum of a neighborhood still pretending not to watch. Someone coughs pointedly behind a screen. Someone else lowers a curtain. Aisha doesn't care. She's not the same girl who entered that house years ago with henna-stained palms and a borrowed necklace that didn't quite match. That girl had smiled a little too wide, apologized a little too quickly, measured her worth in dowry coins and how straight her spine stayed under pressure. This woman, she walks slower, but somehow taller. She's walking into Ida, the required waiting period after a divorce. And while it sounds like something dry and bureaucratic, it's more than that. It's a pause, a full stop, a moment held in religious, emotional, and social suspension. For 3 full menstrual cycles, or 3 lunar months if menstruation doesn't apply, Aisha won't be permitted to remarry. She won't even be encouraged to entertain proposals. Not yet. Not until her body confirms that she's not pregnant, and her mind confirms that this decision is final. Mainstream fact. In early Islamic law, Ida served dual purposes, protecting lineage, ensuring no confusion about paternity, and offering emotional space for reconciliation or closure. It was mandatory after divorce and death of a spouse, though the lengths differed: 3 cycles for divorce, 4 months, and 10 days for widows. So, Aisha settles in. Not in her marital home, she's left that behind, but in her sister's house, which smells like cumin and honey, and is always 5 minutes away from burning something. The floors are worn smooth, the pillows overstuffed, and the youngest nephew insists on calling her Auntie Moon. She pretends to hate it, but secretly, she's never liked a nickname more. The house is louder than what she's used to. Children dart in and out. Cousins visit too often. Even the teapot has a rattle in its lid like it's gossiping. But that's the point. A woman in Ida isn't left alone. She's surrounded, watched over, cared for in the subtle ways that don't feel like pity. Still, even under this gentle chaos, Ida is heavy. There are rules. Aisha can't wear flashy clothes, no bright yellows, no shimmering purples, just soft blues and modest grays. She can't apply perfume, can't attend weddings, can't wander alone at night. She's expected to be quiet, reflective, visible, but not radiant. It's not a punishment. It's a signal to the world, to herself, that something has ended, and that ending deserves to be honored. Quirky tidbit. In some regions, especially in Abbasid Baghdad, perfumes were banned during Ida, but women found loopholes by wearing scented jewelry, amber beads, and musk-infused pins, claiming they were decorative rather than aromatic. Scholars debated. Women smirked. During the first week, Aisha wakes up before dawn, sits by the window, and listens to the birds shout opinions at the sky. She drinks water steeped with mint leaves and pretends she doesn't miss her husband snoring. She definitely doesn't miss his complaints about her singing, but she does miss the way he folded her shawl after evening prayers, quietly, like it mattered. She misses being expected, not loved necessarily, just expected. Her sister Samira tries to cheer her up by making date cakes. They're misshapen, crumbly, and mostly sugar. The children love them. Aisha pretends to. One morning, Samira casually suggests Aisha consider remarrying. I saw that merchant's son looking your way in the market. He sells saffron and writes poetry. That's practically half a dowry right there. Aisha laughs. She's not ready. Maybe she never will be, but it's nice to be seen, even in Ida, especially in Ida. Historians still argue whether Ida functioned more as protection or restriction, whether it gave women space to breathe or fenced them in under the guise of virtue, whether the law served women or simply managed them. But for Aisha, it's not a debate. It's a season, a soft, liminal space between what was and what might be. She reads more now. Old poetry, shopping lists, letters from her cousin in Kufa, who insists every market smells like camel sweat and saffron. She starts copying verses into her own notebook, adds flourishes, doodles, doesn't erase anything. One night she writes something new. I once bloomed in a borrowed pot. Now I want my own garden. She tucks it under her pillow and sleeps better that night. On the 29th day, she visits the bathhouse. Not to cleanse herself of sorrow, she's done that already, but because she wants her hair oiled properly, wants to feel her skin smell like rose water and eucalyptus. She wants the old women there to nod and say, "You're glowing," and they do. One even offers her son in marriage. Aisha says, "I'm still in Ida." The woman winks. But not forever. The moon waxes, then wanes. By the end of the third cycle, Aisha no longer flinches when someone mentions his name. She no longer rehearses conversations she'll never have. She doesn't even count the days anymore. She's just living. When the final day of Ida comes, there is no ceremony, no certificate, no scroll, just the quiet acknowledgement that something sacred has passed, and that she has passed through it, whole, changed, ready or not for whatever's next. She walks outside just after dusk, head held high, scarf loose around her shoulders. The air smells like fig leaves and ash. Someone's playing a reed flute in the distance. A donkey brays in protest. A child drops a basket of onions. It's not poetry, but it's real. And right now, real is enough. She doesn't feel like a wife anymore. She feels like a woman who survived something softly. By the time her Ida has ended, Aisha has quietly begun to inhabit a new shape of self. One that fits looser, breathes easier, no longer curled to match someone else's angles, but stretched, expanded, her own. She still wakes before dawn, but now she sings softly to herself while pouring mint water. No one shushes her. She hums louder. The courtyard at Samira's house is full of drying laundry and a rather rude cat named Jabal, who guards a broken basket like it's the treasury of Mecca. Aisha sidesteps him every morning, determined not to start her newly single life with claw marks. She's not rushing into anything, but let's not pretend the ants haven't noticed her new walk. They're circling like polite falcon's feathers, fluffed in anticipation. There's talk of a matchmaker coming from Wasit, someone's nephew or cousin. Or maybe just a man who owns his own spice stall and doesn't chew with his mouth open. Standards are variable. But Aisha is thinking about something else entirely. The dowry. Mainstream fact In Islamic law, mahar, the dowry given by the husband to the wife, was her personal property, not to be touched even by her husband. In the case of divorce, if the marriage was consummated, the wife retained the full dowry. If not, she typically received only half. These laws were designed to provide financial security and bargaining power for women. When Aisha first married, her mahar had been modest but respectable: 10 dinars, a silver bangle, and a slim volume of poetry by Al-Kansa. She cherished the book more than the money. And when the divorce finalized, no one asked for it back. That was hers, legally, spiritually, unequivocally. In fact, had she been the one to initiate the divorce through a process called khul, she might have had to return part or all of it. But since he was the one to utter the triple talaq, her rights held strong. She spends the first week of post-iddah freedom hiding the silver bangle under her pillow and rereading the poetry until she nearly memorizes the verses, not because she's sad, but because they're hers, fully, finally. Samira thinks she should buy new shoes, red ones, she says, with the little gold trim. You'll look like someone who's never carried someone else's laundry. Aisha grins. Maybe I'll carry my own in style. Meanwhile, in the SUQ, the bustling marketplace, men talk, softly, but with interest. Is it true she kept the whole dowry? Didn't even need her father to mediate? I heard she's looking to marry a scholar. Aisha hears them too, the way they speak, like she's a story, an idea, a woman-shaped whisper. She doesn't mind. Let them whisper. She has errands to run. Quirky tidbit. In some caliphate cities, especially in Andalusia, wealthier women used their dowries to fund schools, gardens, and even poetry salons. These divorced heiresses, as jealous neighbors sometimes called them, were often envied more than pitied. Aisha walks through the market with her scarf loose and her sandals firm. She doesn't linger by the spice seller's stall, despite the fact that he clearly practiced smiling in the mirror this morning. She doesn't avoid him either. She just walks. And in her pocket, a small parchment sealed in wax, her legal divorce document. It's not something she flashes around, but she keeps it close. Because in this time, this place, that scrap of paper, carries weight. It proves her status, protects her from rumor, ensures that if someone does wish to court her, they know exactly who they're dealing with. Not damaged goods, but documented freedom. Historians still argue whether early Islamic divorce laws empowered or constrained women, whether the dowry served more as a shield or a carrot on a stick, whether women like Aisha were anomalies or the quiet norm. But here, in the thrum of the market, Aisha isn't thinking about legal theory. She's thinking about plums, ripe ones, for pie. She buys 3, 2 for the nephews and 1 for herself. The seller hands them over with a knowing smile and says, "Your husband has good taste." She raises an eyebrow. He had good taste, and bites into the plum. Juice runs down her wrist. It tastes like freedom and a little bit of rebellion. That afternoon, Samira finds her sitting on the rooftop, surrounded by scraps of cloth and an old pair of scissors. "Are we sewing something?" "I'm making curtains," Aisha replies, "for wherever I live next." "Does this mean you're moving out?" "Not yet, but maybe soon." Samira sits beside her, picks up a square of fabric, and starts folding. No words, just rhythm. This is what rebuilding looks like. Not a dramatic speech, not a carriage ride to a new city. Just two sisters folding cloth beneath a pinkening sky. When night falls, Aisha lights her own lamp. Not out of habit, but because she wants to see what she's writing. Her new notebook, the one without old letters. She writes, "Divorce didn't break me. It cleared the fog." Then draws a tiny plum beside it. And just like that, she closes the day. No curtain calls, no sweeping music, just the creak of her chair, the scent of ink and plum, and the feeling just for a second that everything she is enough. And maybe that's what divorce really gave her. Not absence, but space. It's been nearly 40 days since Aisha left her husband's home, and in that span of time, something curious has happened. She started laughing again. Not the polite, restrained kind expected at family dinners. No, full-bodied, eye-crinkling, throw-your-head-back laughter. The kind that makes children stare in amazement, and old women blink in judgment before smiling. It's the laughter of someone who has returned to herself. Her old friends begin trickling back into her orbit, not because they stayed away out of malice, though, let's be honest, some of them enjoyed the drama, but because social etiquette had them waiting until her Ida was over. Now the invitations come: tea under fig trees, picnics with dried apricots, embroidered handkerchiefs that match absolutely nothing, but were clearly sewn with love. The first visit is from Zainab, her childhood friend, who bursts in like a dust storm and nearly knocks over a jug of water. "Well," Zainab says, "are we mourning or living?" Aisha grins, definitely living. They hug hard enough to knock a few pins loose from Aisha's scarf. No one cares. It's been too long. Mainstream fact. In early Islamic society, social networks, especially among women, were vital. Friendships, gatherings, and informal support circles often played an active role in women's recovery after divorce, acting as both community therapy and social scaffolding. Zainab comes bearing gifts: almonds, a new ink pot, and rumors. Did you hear Fatima's daughter eloped with a calligrapher? A calligrapher, Aisha, not even a proper merchant. He makes his money selling poems. Aisha raises an eyebrow. That sounds wonderful. It sounds poor. Zainab huffs, then softens. But she's glowing. They sit under the jacaranda tree in the courtyard, purple petals falling into their tea. They talk about everything and nothing, about the bread man who sings off key, about the new astrologer who insists Saturn is in charge now, whatever that means, and yes, about the possibility of love. Not romance. Love. Zainab wants her to consider remarrying. "You've had your rest," she says, patting Aisha's hand like a very ambitious aunt. "Now, let's find you a decent man
with clean fingernails and no debts. Aisha laughs and then thinks about it, because despite everything, despite the ache, the awkward silence, the waiting there, is a sliver of her heart that isn't bruised anymore. Just curious. Quirky tidbit. In certain Abbasid-era cities, divorced women would gather at public poetry readings and literary salons, not just for art, but for matchmaking. A sharp poem and a sharper reply could turn into courtship faster than you could say meter and rhyme. That evening, Samira presents her with a letter, folded, sealed, and smelling faintly of cardamom. Aisha arches a brow. You opened it. Of course I did, Samira shrugs. What if it was a bill? It's not a bill, no, it's not. Samira grins. It's a suitor. The letter is from Idris, a spice merchant Aisha vaguely remembers from her wedding feast. He was the one who accidentally spilled saffron on his robe and then tried to blame the breeze. Not smooth, but endearing. In the letter, Idris writes plainly, respectfully. No flattery, just intentions. I admired your mind before your marriage, and I still do now. If you are open to conversation, I would be honored to speak further. Aisha folds the letter slowly, not because she's unsure, but because she enjoys the weight of the paper in her hand. It's nice to be asked, not assumed, to be seen as a mind, not a womb. She places the letter in her basket. Are you going to reply? Samira asks, practically vibrating. Eventually. Because now she wants to visit the Qadi. Historians still argue whether the judicial role of women in the early Islamic world was truly empowering or just symbolic. But when it came to divorce registration, property rights, and inheritance, many women interacted directly with Qadis judges trained in Islamic jurisprudence and often defended their own cases. Aisha isn't going to the Qadi to complain or to beg. She's going to document, because despite popular imagination, divorces didn't just happen with a whisper. The smart ones, especially smart women, made sure there was ink and stamp and witness. At the court, she is ushered in respectfully. The scribe bows his head, and the Qadi, an elderly man with more rings than fingers, gestures for her to sit. They confirm her ex-husband's identity, confirm the talaq was given, confirm the iddah observed. The Qadi peers at her over his glasses. Do you feel any coercion? Aisha lifts her chin. None. The scribe writes quickly, and just like that, her identity is sealed not as someone's former wife, but as herself, free, documented, recognized. On the way home, she buys new ink, not because she needs it, because she wants it. That night, under a silver-streaked sky, she writes her first proper poem since her divorce. It doesn't rhyme. It doesn't need to. I am not the absence of someone. I am the presence of me. Then she adds A small line at the bottom. P.S. The plums were delicious. Somewhere across the city, Idris will get a reply. Eventually. But for now, Aisha isn't rushing. Because healing isn't a race. It's a quiet series of choices. Soft steps towards selfhood. And tonight she sleeps under a sky full of stars, with no one beside her and no one above her but herself. The morning sun creeps in through the slats of the wooden shutters, catching the corner of Aisha's journal, where the ink from last night hasn't quite dried. She runs her fingers across the page and smiles, not because she's proud of the poem, but because it exists. Because she exists in it, not as someone left behind, or pitied, or waiting, but as the subject, the writer, the speaker. It's a strange and wonderful thing to reclaim your own voice. She folds the page over and ties the notebook with a piece of red thread. There's no lock, but the thread is enough. It says, "This is mine. Today is market day. Again." The city is already buzzing, a low hum of bartering hoofbeats and clinking coins. Samira's children are hollering over dates versus figs, and someone down the street is shouting about eels, eels. Aisha doesn't want to know, but she wraps her scarf tight and steps outside anyway, because she has one final errand before she replies to Idris. The goldsmith. Mainstream fact. In early Islamic societies, women could own, manage, and inherit wealth. Jewelry, especially gold, often functioned as both adornment and portable savings. A divorced woman's jewelry wasn't merely decoration. It was a personal bank, legally protected as her property. The goldsmith remembers her. He bows respectfully, his beard glinting with what appears to be actual gold dust. Or maybe that's just the light. "Ah, the bracelet," he says. Aisha nods. She removes the bangle from her wrist and places it gently on the velvet cloth. It's not damaged, but the clasp is loose. And truthfully, she wants it polished. "It's still yours?" "Yes," he asks, meaning well, but slightly nosy. "Of course," Aisha says calmly. "Why wouldn't it be?" He looks sheepish. "Ah, just rumors, you know." "Then let this shine remind them." She smiles. She leaves it behind for an hour and walks toward the perfumery. No, she's still not dousing herself in rose oil. And oud, she's not that dramatic, but she wants a small bottle of something warm, something subtle. A note of sandalwood, perhaps, or cinnamon. Something she can dab on her wrists when writing. Not for others, for her. Quirky tidbit. In some parts of the Abbasid Caliphate, perfume merchants would offer special widow and divorcee blends, scents, meant to soothe sorrow, attract new interest, or simply declare, "I'm back." One popular blend was amber cardamom and citrus peel. By the time she returns, the bangle gleams like a harvest moon. She slips it on, and it clasps with a satisfying click. A piece of the past polished, not erased. Samira notices immediately. Well, she says. "Someone's glowing." Aisha pretends not to hear. Instead, she sits beneath the fig tree and drafts a letter.
No wax seal yet, just thoughts. Dear Idris, thank you for your kind letter. I remember your saffron-stained robe and your very nervous laugh. It was charming then, and perhaps still is. If you'd like to meet for conversation, not courtship just yet, I'd be open to that. I prefer afternoons, mint tea, and honesty. Warmly, Aisha. She rereads it 3 times, folds it once, then doesn't send it. Not yet. Historians still argue whether early Islamic matchmaking practices gave women enough agency. Some records point to coercive, arranged marriages. Others show strong documentation of women rejecting suitors, setting terms, or even initiating pursuit. What's clear is that women like Aisha, with access to wealth, education, and social support, had more room to choose. So she chooses to wait one more day, just to be sure. That night a cousin arrives for dinner, loud and barefoot, and smelling like he rolled in lentils. He brings a stack of fresh flatbreads and an invitation to a majlis, a public gathering of poetry, music, and light debate hosted by a local scholar. A room full of divorced women and opinionated men. He says, laughing, "You'll fit right in." Samira gasps, "You can't say that." But Aisha's already nodding, because she wants to go, because she has opinions too. The majlis is held in a tiled courtyard, surrounded by lanterns. The air smells like lemons and wax. The host is a thin man with ink-stained fingers and a love of bad metaphors. His poetry is dreadful, delightfully so. But what draws Aisha isn't the performance. It's the crowd. Women leaning forward, men listening. Ideas passed like fruit ripe and sweet. Someone mentions the philosophy of Akel reason. Someone else responds with a joke about camels and logic. And when Aisha adds a comment about the fluidity of law and the tension between tradition and adaptation, people listen. A man in the back even claps. She blushes, but not from shame, from presence. She's not a footnote, not a formerly married question mark. She's a voice. She writes a new poem when she gets home. They thought I was ruined, but I am a root. Buried, yes, but alive. Then adds a P.S. Send the letter tomorrow. And she does. No parade, no flourish, just a quiet step forward. Because healing isn't always grand. Sometimes it's just a letter and a bangle and a fig tree in bloom. You don't expect much from a letter. It's just ink on parchment. After all, dry, weightless, easily lost in a breeze. But the morning Idris replies, Aisha feels it before she sees it. The way the air shifts, the way her pulse quickens, just slightly, like her heart has started listening for footfalls it doesn't recognize yet. The messenger is a boy with knees too big for his legs and a grin he hasn't yet grown into. He bows, stutters her name, and hands over the scroll with both hands as though it might bite. She thanks him and doesn't open it right away, not because she's nervous, but because she wants to open it in her corner of the courtyard, on her woven mat, next to the pot of time she's finally managed to keep alive. And when she does, it's not poetry, it's not flirtation, it's just steady. Idris has written, "I'd be honored to share tea this Thursday. I'll bring the sugar if you bring the conversation." Then I still remember the way you challenged that old man's translation of Al-Mutannabi. It was brilliant and completely terrifying. I think I'd like to be terrified again. She laughs, not loudly, just that small, soft kind. The kind that starts in your stomach and blooms up your throat without asking permission. Mainstream fact, correspondence in the early Islamic world was more than personal. It was political, intellectual, and sometimes romantic. Letters were considered a form of art and could serve as records of negotiations, debates, and budding courtships. Literate women, especially in elite or educated households, were fully capable of writing and managing such exchanges. Aisha tucks the letter under her pillow and doesn't tell Samira right away. She needs a day or two to savor it in secret, like stealing pomegranate seeds from a neighbor's tree. A small indulgence, a promise she's not yet ready to unwrap in public. Instead, she prepares, not for Idris, for herself. A new robe, light blue with silver embroidery at the cuffs. Her favorite ring, a gift from her grandmother, who swore it once belonged to a woman who refused 3 princes before marrying a farmer with good boots. And the scent, just a dab of that sandalwood blend she bought the week her divorce finalized. She doesn't want to impress. She wants to feel like herself. Maybe the best version of herself, but still her. On Thursday, they meet under the fig tree. Idris arrives 5 minutes early, holding a paper bag of sugar and a very determined smile. He bows, not too low, and doesn't try to kiss her hand. Just says, "You look like you write sonnets in your sleep." Aisha blinks. That's the most ridiculous compliment I've ever received. Wait until you hear my second one. And just like that, the ice breaks. Quirky tidbit. In some early Islamic cities, fig trees were associated with love and abundance. Folk wisdom claimed that if a woman accepted a suitor's invitation to tea beneath a fig tree, it meant she was willing to hear his intentions, even if she hadn't yet made up her mind. The conversation is easy, not smooth, because Idris stumbles over his thoughts like a man trying to carry too many lanterns, but easy, comfortable. They talk about books, about spices, about their worst childhood meals. Idris admits he once tried to make rosewater syrup and nearly poisoned his entire family. Aisha admits she once sold fake poetry under her brother's name to make pocket money. At one point, he gestures wildly and knocks over his tea. A puddle spreads across the table. She laughs so hard, she snorts. He looks mortified. She waves it off. "I've survived worse than wet tea," she says. "Trust me." And that's when his face softens. Really softens. Because she's not performing, she's living. Historians still argue whether courtship in early Islamic societies was as liberal as some records suggest, whether women could truly choose, or if their choices were always circled by invisible walls of family reputation and expectation. But there's little debate about the power of mutual consent in Islamic marriage law. The contract required two clear voices, one offering, one accepting. Anything else wasn't binding. Aisha isn't there yet, but she's not running either. They part with a smile and a promise to meet again. No vows, no assumptions, just a quiet next Thursday and a nod that carries more meaning than poetry ever could. That night, Samira finally corners her. Well, he's awkward, Aisha says, and sweet, and I'm not ready. Samira frowns. But I want to be, Aisha adds, and that makes all the difference. Later, beneath the lamp's glow, Aisha writes again, healing is not a silence. It's a song with pauses. She adds, no postscript this time. Just dots the final word and closes the book. Because tonight there's nothing left to say. Just the slow exhale of a woman who is still unfolding. Like a scroll, like a fig tree in bloom. You're back under the fig tree again. The sun is softer this afternoon, filtered through a veil of high clouds. The courtyard feels quieter too, like even the birds have paused to eavesdrop. You'd think this would be the perfect setting for romance to bloom, and maybe it is. But Aisha isn't in a love story. She's in a life story. And life, as always, is a little more complicated. Idris arrives with a small pouch of almonds and a look that's part hopeful, part terrified. He sets the pouch down on the table without a word, and then stands there awkwardly, like he's not sure if he's allowed to sit yet. Aisha gestures to the cushion across from her. Unless you prefer to stand the entire afternoon, he chuckles. I like to keep my options open. She rolls her eyes, but she's smiling. They pour tea. They eat almonds. They talk about a new manuscript. Idris found some obscure botanical treatise filled with drawings of flowers that look suspiciously like animals. Aisha teases him for believing in lemon trees with ears. I didn't believe it, he protests. I just said it was interesting. You said it was revolutionary botany. I was being dramatic. You're not very good at it, which is why I sell spices, not poems. And just like that, the rhythm returns. It's not fast. It's not flirty. It's not fireworks or violins. It's two people finding a shared language again, one built from mistakes and patience and gentle jokes and permission to pause. Mainstream fact. Courtship in early Islamic societies often involved multiple supervised visits with conversations focused not on romance, but on compatibility, values, household roles, beliefs, and reputation. Emotional connection grew through familiarity, not flash. Today's conversation meanders into family territory. Idris shares a story about his sister's parrot, who only knows how to say, "Not now," and how it once ruined a marriage proposal. Aisha shares a story about her uncle who tried to sell her a donkey disguised as a camel. Long story. Involves a lot of cloth and some very creative lying. But then Idris asks the question, not directly, not bluntly.
but enough. So if we were to eventually consider continuing this beyond almonds and tea, Aisha raises one eyebrow. You mean a third date? He turns beet red. Yes, and you're trying to ask without asking. More like testing the weather. She pretends to check the sky. Looks partly cloudy, with a chance of more almonds. He grins, but beneath the humor, something shifts. Aisha sets down her cup. I'm not afraid of marrying again, she says, but I won't be invisible in my own life. You never were, Idris says softly. No, she agrees, but it took me time to remember that. They sit in that moment. No tea, no banter, just truth. Quirky tidbit. In some cities under the Abbasid Caliphate, suitors would present potential brides with riddles or verses to gauge their wit. A correct reply wasn't just impressive, it was sometimes considered a sign of divine alignment. So, Idris ventures no riddles today. Aisha tilts her head. All right, fine. Answer me this. What has no mouth but tells everything? No eyes but sees your every fear? He squints. You, close. It's ink. He leans back. Okay, that's terrifying. Exactly. They laugh again. But there's weight behind it now. The kind of weight that says, we're not playing anymore. Not really. Later that evening, after he leaves, Aisha walks to her bookshelf. She pulls out her old marriage contract, the original one from her first marriage. She hasn't looked at it since the divorce. It's not bitter to her anymore, just paper. The terms are standard dowry maintenance rights of travel, of household management. But reading it now, she sees the absences, the silences, the places where she said nothing because she didn't think she could say anything. Now she drafts a new one. No names, just terms. A marriage where her writing continues, where visits to the majlis are not permitted, but expected, where she is not owed affection, but partnership, where no decision is made for her, only with her. She folds the draft and tucks it into her book of poems, not as a prophecy, just as a possibility. Because being ready doesn't mean being reckless. It means setting the table before the guests arrive. Historians still argue whether early Islamic marriage contracts truly empowered women or if they mostly reflected the privilege of upper classes. But in cities like Basra and Kufa, documented cases show women inserting clauses to protect their education, mobility, and property, long before such ideas were considered modern. The next time Idris visits, he doesn't bring almonds. He brings a scroll. Just thoughts, he says nervously, about what this could look like. Aisha doesn't open it right away, but she says tea first, because she already knows. She'll read it. She'll mark it. She might edit a line or two, but she's not afraid. Not anymore. Because healing isn't just remembering who you are. It's deciding who you want to be next. And sometimes that's a woman with a contract, a fig tree, and a man who still can't pour tea without spilling it. You wake to birdsong and a scent you can't quite place, something earthy and warm, like parchment that soaked up the sun. It's a Thursday again,
which means tea with Idris. Or maybe it doesn't. Today feels different, lighter, somehow. Not because the weight has gone, but because you've learned how to carry it differently. Aisha ties back her hair and slips on her softest shawl, the one with tiny stitched flowers along the edge, mostly faded now, but loved. She doesn't wear it for anyone. She wears it because it feels like herself. She doesn't bring the contract with her. Not yet. Idris is already waiting under the fig tree, fussing with a crooked table leg. He looks up startled, like he wasn't expecting her to actually show. You came. You invited me. I invite people all the time, he says. Doesn't mean they always come back. Maybe they didn't like your tea, Aisha says, taking a seat. Or your contract. He freezes. I read it, she adds, sipping slowly. You have very neat handwriting and very specific ideas about where to store lentils. Apparently, he mutters. She grins. It was thoughtful. Was I rewrote half of it? Mainstream fact. Early Islamic marriage contracts were not standardized and could include personalized stipulations, especially when initiated by educated or affluent women. These could include financial arrangements, living conditions, or even access to books and learning. Aisha pulls out her version. It's tucked inside a leather folio, along with 2 poems and 1 cookie she forgot was in there. Don't read it now, she warns, handing it over. It's long and poetic and maybe a little stubborn, like you. Exactly. He takes it like she's handed him a holy relic. He doesn't open it, just cradles it like something delicate. You terrify me, he says. I know, but in the best way. She nods. Good. They drink the rest of the tea in silence. Not awkward silence, companionable silence, a kind of wordless music. The leaves above whisper and sway, and the sugar cubes clink faintly in their saucers. Everything feels suspended, like time has stepped aside for a moment. Do you ever miss him? Idris asks suddenly. Aisha tilts her head. I don't mean sorry. I didn't mean it's all right, she says. Sometimes I miss the version of myself who still believed I was supposed to make everyone else comfortable. He nods. That version was tired. She was, Aisha agrees, but she was also kind and loyal and very good at baking apricot bread. Do you still bake apricot bread? No. Shame. They laugh again. Quirky tidbit. Some Abbasid cities held widow fairs, informal gatherings where divorced or widowed women could socialize, showcase skills like cooking or writing, and sometimes meet suitors. They were semi-serious events, equal parts matchmaking and mingling. I think you would have done well at a widow fair, Idris says. Aisha narrows her eyes. Are you comparing me to a sheep at market? No, he says carefully. I'm saying you would have owned the market. She smirks. Better. A breeze stirs the edge of her shawl. She thinks about the contract in his hand, about the line she added that says books must be kept in the bedroom, not the kitchen, no matter how romantic the idea of reading while cooking may seem. She thinks about how much she wanted to cross that line out, but didn't, because even small details matter. She looks at Idris, still quiet, still holding her words like they're a treasure map he doesn't want to smudge. "You don't have to sign it," she says gently. "I know, and if you do, it's not the end of the story. I hope not. It's just a new page." He smiles. "May I read it tonight?" "You'd better," she says. "Page 6 is about laundry." "Oh dear." "And page 7 is about poetry in bed." "Better." They part with no ceremony, just a soft exchange of eyes and a maybe next week shrug. Aisha walks home slower than usual. The air is thick with the promise of rain, and her ankles ache in a familiar grounding way. When she gets home, she pulls out an old letter from her mother, one she's read a dozen times. The ink is fading now, but the words remain. "Never let anyone decide what your softness should cost." Aisha adds that quote to the end of the contract, in her own handwriting, then closes the folio and sets it on her shelf. Not because she's made a decision, but because she doesn't have to rush one. Historians still argue whether women's contracts were truly respected by families or later dismissed under patriarchal interpretations. But preserved records show dozens of cases where courts upheld a woman's stipulations, even ones seen as unconventional. Sometimes the ink held power, but only when the woman holding the pen believed it did. That night, Aisha writes a new poem, not about Idris, not about marriage, about rain. "Let the storm come. I know how to dry." She doesn't read it aloud, not yet. But she sleeps with her window open, just in case. You know it before she does, before the sun rises, before the sandals scuff across the courtyard, before Idris knocks gently at the door. This moment has been coming, not loudly, not dramatically, but like water over stone. Quiet persistence. It's not a proposal. It's not even a promise. It's something softer, stranger, a recognition. Aisha opens the door in her morning robe. No makeup, no practiced posture, just eyes still fogged with sleep and a slight smudge of ink on her thumb from the poem she scribbled just before bed. Idris holds up a scroll. "It's signed," he says. She blinks. "You read the laundry clause. I read every clause. And the one about breakfast in bed. That was a trap, wasn't it?" "Absolutely." He grins. "I accept." She doesn't reach for the scroll. She doesn't even step aside. She just looks at him and says, "Okay," because that's all this needs. Not fanfare, not family meetings, just okay. But before anything else can unfold, before the neighbors can peek through curtains, or Samira can launch into celebratory squealing, Aisha steps outside and closes the door behind her. "Walk with me," she says. And they go, not hand in hand, but side by side through the quiet alleys, still damp with morning. Mainstream fact: in Islamic law, a man could issue a talaq divorce, typically by declaration, but a woman could also request a divorce through hul, often involving her returning her dowry, If agreed upon, this form of divorce was fully legal and recognized in Islamic courts. They pass an old well and a woman selling sesame buns. The woman winks at Aisha, and Aisha can't tell if it's for the man or the robe. Either way, she smiles. "You're quiet," Idris says. "I'm thinking. Good things, real things." He nods. They stop near a worn bench beneath an orange tree. Aisha sits and pulls something from her pocket. It's a small amulet, glass and thread, and a stone so pale it could be a raindrop. "This was my mahr," she says. Idris's brow furrows. "You kept it. I returned the rest, the money, the bracelet, the silk scarf I never liked. But I kept this, not because I wanted to remember him, but because I wanted to remember me, the girl who asked for something that wouldn't rot, something small, but lasting." He says nothing, just listens. She threads the cord between her fingers. "I thought about asking for the same thing from you," she admits. "Did you?" "I did. But I changed my mind." "Why?" "Because I want a different kind of memory this time." And with that, she drops the amulet into the dirt at her feet. Quirky tidbit. In some Bedouin communities, women kept a token or keepsake from their mahr, hidden in their clothing, not out of sentimentality, but as a symbolic anchor. Losing it was seen as letting go of the past, good or bad. Idris watches as she brushes soil over the stone with the toe of her sandal. "I don't need another charm," she says. "I need continuity. I need someone who doesn't flinch when I get loud or weird or too full of metaphors." He smiles. "I like metaphors. I know, especially the weird ones." A pause. "Especially yours." Historians still argue whether early Islamic divorce practices gave true autonomy to women, or if they merely created legal illusions of it. But stories like Aisha's, scattered in records, preserved in poetry, and passed between women like recipes, suggest something else: the power of choice, however imperfect. They walk back in comfortable silence. As they pass the corner spice stall, Idris reaches out and plucks a small sprig of rosemary from a crate. He tucks it behind her ear. She snorts. "That's not romantic. That's seasoning." He shrugs. "You're always talking about flavor." Later that night, Aisha sits with Samira on the balcony. The city hums below, and a distant flute drifts up from a wedding party across the river. "Do you love him?" Samira asks. Aisha doesn't answer right away. She watches the lanterns flicker along the rooftop edges, listens to the laughter echoing from streets she used to avoid walking alone. "I love what I become around him," she says finally. And that's enough, because this isn't a fairy tale. It's a history, one she's choosing to write in ink, not pencil. The wedding is small, not that kind of wedding. No parades of horses or showers of gold coins. No musicians with lutes. No dancers spinning in silks. Just a courtyard with 2 chairs, 1 fig tree, and the distinct smell of lentils someone forgot on the stove. You don't need much more than that. Aisha wears green, not the traditional white, not something stitched for pageantry, just soft green with sleeves that don't get in the way when she writes. Idris wears something tidy and slightly wrinkled. His turban is crooked. Aisha fixes it halfway through the ceremony. No one minds. The Qadi arrives just before dusk, his sandals' dusty scroll tucked under one arm. He reads their contract with a squint, mutters mashallah 3 times, and raises one eyebrow at the clause about poetry readings during dinner. Is this binding, he asks. Aisha nods. More than you know. The ceremony takes less than 15 minutes. A witness from each family, a handful of dates, a quiet I accept from both sides. And that's it. Not dramatic, but sacred in its own sleepy way. Mainstream fact. In Islamic tradition, a marriage is valid if both parties give clear consent. A mahr is agreed upon, and 2 adult witnesses are present. The simplicity and speed of such ceremonies often surprised European travelers of the medieval period. Afterward, they share a plate of pistachios and honey cakes. Aisha's uncle brings a stringed instrument and plays exactly 1 song before announcing he's too old for this nonsense. Samira drinks too much tea and insists on showing everyone a drawing of a goat that looks suspiciously like Idris. It kind of does. The neighbors watch from behind curtains, but this time the whispers carry laughter instead of speculation. A widow who marries again, someone says. Without asking permission, another adds, bold, beautiful, maybe both. That night, Aisha lies awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to Idris breathe. She doesn't feel like a bride. She feels like herself, and that perhaps is the best feeling of all. But the real story begins the next morning. Because marriage, like everything else in this world, is easier to start than to maintain. The morning brings the first squabble. Idris wants to rearrange the bookshelves. Aisha wants to rearrange him. You can't put travel logs next to botanical illustrations, she says. They're both about discovery. She glares. No. He compromises by offering to make breakfast. He burns the flatbread. She eats it anyway. That's love, apparently. Quirky tidbit. In some Abbasid households, couples created harmony scrolls, written agreements for how to handle chores, holidays, even arguments. These were sometimes illuminated with little drawings or jokes, a surprisingly early form of relationship contracts. Later that week, they receive visitors. A child from Aisha's old neighborhood brings a basket of dried figs. A former student of Idris shows up with an awkward hug and a confused expression, unsure whether to bow clap or cry. I thought you weren't the marrying type, the student says. I'm not, Idris replies. Then, I married someone who isn't either. Fair enough. Even the Qadi returns this time just to drink tea and ask about the laundry clause again. You weren't joking about that, were you? Not even a little. The days pass slowly. Aisha starts a new manuscript. Idris opens a spice stall closer to the library. They still argue about lentils and shelving, but now they do it while folding laundry together. She starts leaving her books open on the table. He adds little notes in the margins, sometimes actual commentary, sometimes tiny drawings of camels with angry eyebrows. They begin to feel like a unit, not always in sync, not always romantic, but reliable, solid, like a spoon in a well-worn bowl. Historians still argue whether medieval Islamic marriages were fundamentally egalitarian or simply layered with ceremonial equality, masking structural imbalance. But the scrolls, letters, and poetry exchanged between real couples suggest something tender and real beneath the law: respect, affection, curiosity. Aisha writes another poem. He did not arrive on a horse, but with his sleeves rolled up, carrying tea and listening. She doesn't publish it. It lives in the kitchen drawer beneath the spoons. Some things aren't for public reading. One evening, after a quiet dinner, Idris asks, "Do you ever think about your first marriage?" "Sometimes." "Do you wish it ended differently?" She shrugs. "It ended as it should. I just wish I'd known sooner that it could." He nods. And then, "Do you think this one will last?" She smiles, slow and lopsided. "I think we'll last longer than your flatbread." He laughs. That's not much of a compliment. It's honest. They sit under the fig tree as the last light fades. No music, no ceremony. Just two people wrapped in soft arguments, warm bread, and quiet joy. By the end of spring, the neighbors stop whispering, not because people have changed, but because there's nothing particularly scandalous about a couple arguing over cumin versus coriander, or debating which side of the bed gets more moonlight. Boredom, not acceptance, is often the closest thing to peace in a tightly knit neighborhood. Aisha finds herself doing things she once swore off, smiling at passing children, nodding at former in-laws in the market, even offering advice to a young woman debating whether to marry a man with 2 goats and no books. "Choose the one with books," she says flatly. "What if he doesn't have goats? Then buy your own goats." The girl doesn't fully understand, but she laughs anyway. At home, Idris is teaching himself how to sew. He's terrible at it. There's a sleeve with 3 openings and a buttonhole that somehow closes nothing. Aisha applauds every effort as if it's embroidery worthy of caliphs. Their life is simple and surprisingly quiet. Mainstream fact, contrary to popular belief, many early Islamic divorces were civil and amicable, especially in urban centers like Baghdad or Damascus. In some cases, couples even remained friends or business partners after separation, reflecting the social maturity of those legal systems. Aisha's friend from the widow's circle, Layla, finally comes to visit. She brings pickled lemons and an embroidered napkin that says, "Don't marry poets unless you want metaphor in your tea." Idris laughs too hard at that. "Why did you wait so long to remarry?" Layla asks once they're alone. Aisha thinks for a moment. "Because the first time I did it to be someone's answer. The second time I did it without needing a question." Layla nods. "You've always been better with riddles." They drink tea until the sun climbs high and the rooftops shimmer with heat. Somewhere below, a goat bleats like it knows someone's discussing dowries again. Idris spends that afternoon reorganizing their tiny kitchen. He insists the salt belongs on the bottom shelf. Aisha retaliates by labeling all the spice jars in riddles. Guess which one's cinnamon she dares. He gets it wrong, twice. Quirky tidbit. In the 9th century Abbasid world, some couples created household journals, not for emotional outpouring, but to record everyday details, like which basket the cat prefers, or who left the lantern burning. These journals became treasured artifacts of ordinary love. That evening, Aisha starts writing in a small green notebook the daily non-disasters. She writes, "No one spilled the ink pot. Idris remembered to water the fig. We didn't argue about soup temperature. He said I looked like poetry in motion. I think he meant my robe trailing behind me. I told him he looked like an unripe mango. I meant it kindly." They take a short trip to the river the next week. Aisha wears sandals too thin for walking. Idris packs 3 scrolls and forgets the dates. They eat figs. They argue about which bird is louder. They kiss like people who know arguments aren't enemies, just mispronounced affection. The next morning, a messenger arrives at their home. Not with news, with paper. It's from Samira, who has moved to another town. Her letter is full of misspelled words, overused exclamation marks, and the urgent tone of someone who's just discovered love letters written by her grandmother. She had 3 husbands, Samira writes. One died, one disappeared, one she kicked out for stealing her hair oil. Aisha reads it aloud. Idris says hair oil is sacred. They both nod solemnly. Historians still argue whether the everyday marriages of the Abbasid period reflected broader shifts in gender roles, or were simply unique pockets of equilibrium in a patriarchal world. But the truth, buried in family letters and market jokes, is that some couples just worked quietly, stubbornly, with deep fondness and bad cooking. Later, when Idris accidentally knocks over Aisha's inkpot and freezes like a guilty child, she doesn't yell. She laughs. Write your apology in the margins, she says. So he does. The words are smudged and crooked, but heartfelt. That night, she adds a line to her notebook. He ruined my ink, but remembered my name when he said, sorry. So it evens out. Rain comes finally, not the showy kind that floods courtyards or turns alleyways into rivers, but a soft rhythmic drizzle that makes everything smell like old wood and citrus peels. It taps gently on the clay tiles above your head and drips from the fig leaves outside the window. You don't notice it at first. You're too busy watching Idris try to fit a pillow into a pillowcase that is clearly too small. It's not the wrong size, he insists, even as one corner sticks out like a folded carpet. It's just ambitiously shaped. Aisha throws him another pillowcase. Try again, philosopher. He grumbles but smiles. He always smiles when she calls him that. They don't leave the house that day. There's no reason to. The city slows down in the rain, and so do they. The bread is slightly stale, the tea is a little too strong, and everything feels perfect in its imperfection. Outside, Children chase raindrops like they're worth something. Maybe they are. Mainstream fact: the early Islamic Caliphates placed high value on hospitality and domestic stability. Rainy days often became natural opportunities for introspection, prayer poetry, and small household repairs, simple rhythms of life that sustained communities between major events. Later in the afternoon, Layla comes by with a proposal. Not for marriage, those days are behind her, she says with a theatrical wave, but for business. I'm opening a bookshop, she announces, and I want you to write for it. Aisha blinks. You want me to copy manuscripts? Layla shakes her head. No. I want your words, stories, poems, maybe even that ridiculous piece about the goat with emotional issues. That's a metaphor. Sure it is, darling. They laugh like people who've survived worse together. Aisha agrees, not because she wants fame or coin, but because something about putting her own name on parchment feels different this time. Not rebellious, not risky, just right. When she tells Idris, he raises an eyebrow. Will your stories mention me? Only the embarrassing ones. Excellent, quirky tidbit. In certain regions of the Islamic world during the 9th century, women ran independent businesses from perfumeries to bookshops. Some even acted as patrons for writers and scholars, funding the preservation and production of literary work under their own names. The first story, Aisha writes, is about a woman who dreams of a city made of honey and forgets her own name until a bird reminds her. It's nonsensical, dreamlike, slightly unsettling. Layla loves it. They print 15 copies by hand. Each one sells within 3 days. Aisha doesn't tell anyone how many spelling mistakes she corrected at the last minute. She just smiles and pretends the whole thing was effortless. It wasn't. But it's hers, and that's the point. By the end of the month, she's published 3 more stories, and Idris is secretly writing one of his own, a tale about a philosopher who gets outwitted by a cat. She finds the draft, adds a few footnotes, corrects his grammar. He pretends to be offended. They share a pomegranate under the fig tree and laugh until they're tired. Not drunk tired, not grief tired, just content. Aisha adds a line to her notebook. Today I laughed more than I sighed. That feels like progress. Historians still argue whether the literary freedom women enjoyed in early Islamic cities was the norm or the exception. While many point to urban elites as outliers, others argue that education and creative expression were far more accessible to women, especially widows and divorcees, than previously assumed. As summer leans in, their home starts to smell like ink and coriander. Scrolls pile up in corners. Aisha's stories multiply faster than they can be sold. Idris starts binding them himself, muttering about spines and margins and whatever story glue is. Is this what divorce leads to? Samira asks during a surprise visit. Ink-stained fingers and too many pillows. Aisha shrugs. Better than silence and too much pretending. That night, she dreams of her first husband, but it's not a nightmare. They're both older, sitting across from each other in a garden that doesn't exist. He pours tea, and she thanks him. Nothing more. Just that. She wakes up with a wet cheek and no shame. Idris is already up making breakfast. He burns the bread again. She eats it anyway. You're late to the market again. Aisha told Idris to pick up coriander apricots and those little clay cups that crack after a season but feel perfect in the hand. Instead, he returns with sesame figs and a folding chessboard he insists was a bargain. We don't even play chess, she says. We could start, he offers hopeful. She raises one eyebrow. Only if you let me win, he considers. I'll pretend to. This is what year 2 looks like. Fewer nerves, more teasing, less ceremony, more forgotten shopping lists. But something odd happens the following week. It starts with a knock on the door. A boy barely tall enough to reach the handle holds out a rolled parchment. His feet are dusty. His eyes are wary. For the lady, he says, handing Aisha the scroll like it might explode. She opens it and stops breathing. It's her ex-husband's handwriting. Mainstream fact, in Islamic law, a man could remarry a divorced wife up to 2 times without issue. But after the 3rd divorce, reconciliation was forbidden unless the woman married and divorced someone else first, a legal and spiritual boundary intended to prevent frivolous cycles of breakups and makeups. The scroll is carefully worded, respectful, a bit dramatic. He asks to speak with her. No obligations, just a conversation. Idris reads over her shoulder. You don't have to reply. She nods. I know, but you're going to. I am. And she does. They meet at the public fountain where the pigeons steal breadcrumbs from unattended baskets, and everyone pretends not to watch everyone else. He looks older, tired in a quiet way. Softer, maybe. You look well, he says. I am, she replies. They talk for 10 minutes. He tells her his second marriage ended, that he never stopped wondering if they gave up too soon, that he still keeps the scarf she embroidered. I burned mine, she says bluntly. He laughs. You always did things properly. When he asks if she'd consider reconciling, she doesn't hesitate. No, he nods. I had to ask. She places a hand over his, briefly, and I'm glad you did. Quirky tidbit. Some women, upon being divorced for the 3rd time, would arrange marriages with trusted male friends to make the union lawful again. These temporary marriages, tahleel, were legal but morally complex, often involving detailed contracts and awkward reunions. Aisha tells Idris everything that evening. He listens without interruption. Then casually, if you'd said yes, would you still eat my burnt bread? Only out of pity. They both laugh. Later, she adds to her green notebook, some stories don't need sequels, just a well-written ending. But endings are a strange thing in her world, because 2 days later, Idris knocks over the inkpot again, because the fig tree finally produces one edible fig, and Idris insists it's divinely mediocre, because Samira visits and wants to know what reconciliation really means. It's not about going back, Aisha explains. It's about knowing why you won't. Historians still argue whether the practice of tahlil marriages in the Abbasid period was widespread or exaggerated by later scholars. Some see them as examples of manipulation, others as clever agency in a restrictive system. A week after the fountain meeting, Aisha receives another scroll. This one is from a scholar in Kufa who read one of her stories, The City of Honey and Forgetting, and wants permission to copy it for his students. Shall I charge a fee? She asks Idris. Charge him a fig, he says, handing her the tree's one decent offering. She mails it with a note. Take the story. Leave the fruit. It's awful. In the quiet that follows, she writes a new story. This one begins, she did not return to him. She returned to herself. And this time she signs her full name. The fig tree finally sheds its last leaf, and with it a small ceremony passes unnoticed. There's no celebration, no date marked on the calendar, but today marks exactly 3 years since Aisha and Idris agreed to make tea in the same kitchen. Not a wedding anniversary in the formal sense, no embroidered handkerchiefs or poetry carved into stone. Just a quiet nod between two people who still argue over the shelf order of spice jars. The morning begins with silence. Not the heavy kind, the good kind, the kind that carries the smell of cardamom tea and the soft flutter of parchment pages being turned too slowly to be productive. Idris hums as he writes. Aisha pretends not to notice. She's busy sketching the cover for her next story, one about a woman who falls in love with the moon and ends up turning into a reflection on the river. It makes no sense, but she enjoys it. That afternoon, a letter arrives. This time it's not for her. It's from Idris's sister, long estranged writing from a distant oasis city. She asks if he'll come visit. She's ill, but not dying. Just dramatic, Idris says. Still, the letter is warm, curious, an invitation to a chapter he thought had closed. You should go, Aisha tells him. You'll be bored without my burnt bread. I'll manage. Mainstream fact. Long-distance travel in the Abbasid Caliphates was both common and slow. Caravan routes stitched cities together, and a journey of several hundred miles could take weeks. Still, letters often arrived ahead of travelers, serving as both logistical and emotional emissaries. Idris prepares for the trip in his usual chaotic fashion. He packs scrolls, but forgets clothes. He ties his sandals wrong. Aisha has to repack everything twice and finally slips a small pouch of dried lavender into the corner of his satchel. For the headaches you'll get from your sister's stories, she explains. He doesn't leave that day, though. They delay the trip by one evening, just to sit under the fig tree together, even though it's bare. They eat soup that's too salty, read each other's bad handwriting, and joke about turning their life into a fictional story, so confusing no one could tell what was real. I'll be gone 2 weeks, Idris says. 2.5. Will you miss me? I'll consider it. Quirky tidbit. Some Abbasid couples used absence journals during travel small notebooks passed between spouses that contained daily reflections, poems, and sketches. When reunited, reading each other's entries became a new form of intimacy, a gentle weaving of days spent apart. The next morning, Aisha watches him leave. She doesn't cry. Instead, she reorganizes the spice shelf the way she always wanted. She moves the coriander front and center and hides the cumin in a drawer. Power move. Then she returns to her notebook. Day one without him, peaceful. Also, I burned the bread. The days pass in quiet rhythm. She eats when she remembers, writes more, rereads old poems she once buried. Layla visits with pastries that are suspiciously round and possibly experimental. I tried something new, Layla says. So did the caliph's cook, once Aisha mutters, biting into the confusion. Still there's laughter, there's light, there's room to remember herself, not as a half of a whole, but a whole who occasionally chooses to share her space. Historians still argue whether women in 9th century Islamic society had full agency over the household in their husband's absence. While some sources imply male guardianship remained intact, numerous legal documents and diary fragments suggest women managed affairs with full autonomy, especially in urban households. On the 12th day, Aisha finds one of Idris's forgotten scrolls tucked into the couch. It's a rough draft of a story, a tale of a man who follows a trail of rose petals, expecting to find romance, but discovers a library instead. He stays anyway. She doesn't read the ending. She tucks it back into place, smiles, and lights a lamp. Outside the fig tree, though, bare, stands tall. Inside the house is quiet, but not lonely. That night, she writes, he went away. But he took nothing from me. I stayed. And I found something new in the echo of his absence. The sky is dust-colored when Idris returns, not dramatically, not with trumpets or gifts. He simply appears at the gate a little thinner, a little tanned, dragging a satchel that looks like it's been attacked by every rock between here and the desert. His sandal strap is broken. There's a feather stuck in his beard. You look like a pilgrim who lost a bet, Aisha says, not looking up from her book. I brought you something, he replies, holding up a dented brass spoon. She takes it solemnly. We are now complete. They stand there in the doorway for a beat longer than necessary. Neither moves first. Then she turns and walks inside, and he follows. Mainstream fact. Return rituals in early Islamic households were often understated. While grand welcomes existed for travelers returning from pilgrimage or war, most family reunions, especially among the middle class, were private affairs, marked by a meal shared stories and sometimes symbolic gifts. Idris smells like camel and cumin and the perfume of an unfamiliar city. He tells her about the oasis, his sister's constant fretting, the merchant who tried to sell him a magic ring for the price of 2 goats, and a proverb. She listens, stirring lentils, pretending to disapprove. I'm glad you went, she says finally. Me too. And I reorganized the spices. I noticed. They fall back into routine with the ease of people who trust that a shared silence can be more honest than a dozen declarations. But something is different now. Not broken, not even changed, just expanded. Like a room you didn't realize had a window all along. That night, Aisha brings out her absence journal. She reads it aloud, skipping some entries, but highlighting a few. Day 4, I accidentally boiled ink instead of tea. Day 9, someone tried to flirt with me at the market. I told him my husband was a philosopher who wrestles goats. He left quickly. Day 12, I missed your humming more than your talking. Strange. Idris tries not to smile. Fails. Quirky tidbit. Some Abbasid households adopted a custom of reading each other's travel journals aloud as a form of foreplay. It was a subtle intellectual intimacy proof that words could stitch together what distance had thinned. The fig tree sprouts a single new leaf. Idris calls it a miracle. Aisha calls it biology, but she smiles anyway. They begin sharing a new story, not just writing one, but living it. A slower tale, less about drama, more about rhythm. Mismatched cups, evening walks, old jokes that still land. At dinner, Idris asks if she wants to adopt a stray cat from the neighbor. We already have a philosopher, Aisha says. Now you want a poet. I think it's more of a tax collector. Even worse, they adopt it anyway. The cat sleeps near the scroll, sheds fur into ink pots, and meows exactly when Aisha tries to write a metaphor. Perfect timing. She pens a new story, a woman, a cat, and a man who forgot his sandals. It's absurd and oddly profound. Layla loves it. The bookshop sells out again. Historians still argue whether the emotional dynamics of remarried couples in Islamic antiquity differed substantially from first marriages. Letters and poetic fragments suggest that the second time around, partners often approached love with more pragmatism, but also more humor, and perhaps, paradoxically, more tenderness. Idris gives her another gift a week later. It's not jewelry. It's not a scarf. It's a stitched pillowcase, his first successful sewing project. It has uneven corners. The thread is too tight and the embroidery reads, "You win, always." She places it on their shared cushion. They don't say much that night, but their hands brush as they pass each other in the kitchen. And when she writes in her journal before bed, she adds, "He brought home a spoon, a story, and a pillow." None of them were perfect. All of them were enough. One morning you wake up to find Idris standing over a pile of papers, scratching his head like they betrayed him in the night. They moved, he insists. I had them organized. In what language Aisha mumbles, still wrapped in the blanket, like a very dignified caterpillar. He points. This pile was poetry. That one was story drafts. This one was, well, I don't know what that one was, but it had a system. She shuffles over, yawning. Idris, you stacked them by color again. They looked pleasing. I'm going back to sleep. The papers don't get sorted that day. Instead, they get reread, laughed at, annotated with sarcastic commentary in the margins. One scroll ends with a doodle of a goat lecturing a classroom full of chickens. Aisha circles it and writes, "Tenure denied." They decide finally to put together a small collection of their stories. Nothing formal, just for friends. A homemade volume bound with mismatched twine and closed with a button from Idris's old tunic. They call it Mostly True. It sells 13 copies in the first week, 15 if you count the two Idris buys back for editing errors. Mainstream fact book production in the Abbasid Caliphate saw a golden age in the 9th century. The Bait al-Hikmah House of Wisdom in Baghdad promoted translations, but private households also produced handwritten books for limited circulation among friends and students, creating informal literary salons. Layla hosts a reading night in her shop. It's supposed to be literary. What it becomes is part open mic, part gossip circle, part impromptu bakery review. Idris reads a story about a man who asks a question so big that no one answers it for 3 generations. Aisha reads a letter she never sent to her ex-husband. It's short, gentle, and ends with, "I hope you've forgiven yourself too." The room goes quiet in a way that doesn't hurt. And then someone claps, not politely, honestly. Afterward, a young woman approaches Aisha, maybe 20, eyes too sharp for her age. "I didn't know we were allowed to be funny about pain," she says. Aisha touches her shoulder. "It's how I made peace with it." The woman nods and buys 3 scrolls. Quirky tidbit. Satirical writing, particularly by women, existed in pockets of the Abbasid world. Though rare, some female poets used wit and metaphor to critique social roles, marriage expectations, and even legal inconsistencies, sometimes slipping their commentary into romantic verse or parables. That night, Aisha lies awake, not worried, just full. The house smells like rose water and ink. The cat is sleeping on Idris's half-finished poem. The fig tree now has 3 leaves, which Aisha swears is a record. She writes 1 line before turning out the lamp. Grief doesn't leave. It just stops needing all the space. And Idris, without opening his eyes, murmurs, "That better be in volume 2. Historians still argue whether the creative partnerships between spouses in early Islamic households were romanticized by later writers, or truly as collaborative as some accounts suggest. Fragmented scrolls from urban women's salons suggest the latter shared work, shared names, shared ink stains. 2 weeks later, they receive an invitation. A larger bookshop 2 towns over wants to host a reading. They spelled your name wrong. Idris notes holding the scroll. How wrong. They called you Aisha al-Milan. She snorts. That's your fault. You made me write that fruit metaphor. It was evocative. They go anyway. On the journey there, Aisha writes in her journal, "Once,
I thought divorce meant erasure. Now I see it was just a comma. This chapter is funnier, and the co-author brings snacks. They read to a room of strangers. They sell out of scrolls, and they walk home in the dark quiet and grinning, pretending not to race each other back to the fig tree. The fig tree has grown 5 leaves now. Idris claims it's because of his talking to it daily. Aisha insists it's because she stopped letting him water it. They agree to disagree, mostly because the tree seems to thrive on the argument. Today is the market festival, and the town square smells like cinnamon sweat, roasted almonds, and bargaining. There are scarves dyed in saffron, and ink amulets shaped like crescent moons, and a man selling miracle ink that claims to make all your metaphors land. Do you think it works? Idris asks. If it did, you wouldn't still be writing about goats, Aisha replies. They buy some anyway. The sun is warm, but not rude, and Aisha finds herself smiling at things without knowing why. Children chasing a hoop down the dusty lane, an old woman humming off-key beside a stall of brass trinkets, the way Idris pretends not to be tempted by the honey cakes and then ends up with 3. He looks over at her, powdered sugar on his nose. "What, you're glowing?" he says. "I'm sweating," she replies. Same difference. Mainstream fact, urban life in Abbasid towns was punctuated by local festivals, especially around marketplaces. These events blended trade with performance, storytelling, poetry contests, and impromptu readings, serving as both entertainment and a vehicle for cultural transmission. Aisha finds a stall run by an old scribe, not a young apprentice with flashy paper and showy ink pots. This man's scrolls are slightly faded, his fingers stained from decades of storytelling. She picks up a bundle labeled "Letters Never Sent." Inside are anonymous notes, some bitter, some funny, all unfinished. "I forgive you, but I still won't write back. Why did you choose silence instead of a goodbye? Tell your mother I liked her stew. Aisha buys them all." Back home, she and Idris read them aloud like bedtime stories. One scroll ends abruptly with, "And if I ever see you again." Idris finishes it. "I'll pretend I don't remember where the cumin is." Aisha laughs so hard she nearly chokes on her tea. Quirky tidbit. In the Abbasid world, there was a minor but fascinating literary subgenre of ghost letters. Imagined correspondences that people would write and never send. Some were meditative, others sarcastic, and many were copied and shared like miniature epistolary theater. The next day, Layla proposes a new idea. "You two should teach a writing workshop." Idris balks. "We're hardly scholars." Layla shrugs. "You're honest. You're funny. People trust what you write because it feels like something they already lived through." Aisha thinks about it, then says, "We'll do it, but only if we get to give out snacks." They hold the first session under the fig tree. 4 people show up, then 8, then 15. One man reads a story about losing his wife and forgetting how to sleep without her. A teenage girl shares a poem written to her future self. An old merchant scribbles letters to his younger brother
whom he hasn't seen in 30 years. No one critiques. No one edits. Everyone claps. Aisha writes that night, "The world doesn't need perfect writers. It needs brave ones, and a fig tree to sit under." Historians still argue whether informal literary salons like this, especially ones led by women, were widely accepted or mostly confined to progressive urban enclaves. Some believe these gatherings laid the groundwork for poetic movements centuries later. Others say they were simply stories shared between friends, and that was enough. Idris eventually frames the weird ink-stained scroll. They started with the goat, the chickens, the tenure joke. It hangs above the shelf now, next to a growing collection of anonymous letters. And every few days, someone leaves a new one at the door. Unsigned, unsealed. Aisha reads them aloud always. And after each one, she says, "That person is healing." Idris doesn't ask how she knows. He just believes her. Because some stories don't need endings. They just need somewhere soft to land. The fig tree bears fruit. Not many. Just 2. But it's enough to call the neighbors over and pretend it's a miraculous bounty. Aisha slices them carefully, placing each half on mismatched plates. Idris drizzles honey over them like he's composing a verse. Layla toasts to unexpected sweetness, and someone from the writing circle brings a fresh poem as tribute. It's titled "Fig Leaf Promises." Aisha pretends not to cry. Idris doesn't pretend. Later that evening, the cat knocks over an inkwell. Again. But this time it lands on a scroll. Neither of them remember writing. The ink bleeds and swirls until the words are barely legible. Aisha squints and reads aloud. "We built a house from broken scrolls and laughed every time it creaked." She sets it aside and whispers, "Maybe that one was never meant to be edited." Mainstream fact: in Abbasid culture, poetry and prose were often viewed as living documents, mutable, reshaped, passed from hand to hand. A final draft was a flexible concept, especially in informal literary settings. Stories evolved with the telling. Their writing workshop becomes a small movement. People begin sending letters from neighboring towns, requesting readings, transcribed versions, even advice. One woman sends a scroll simply labeled, "How do I forgive someone who won't say sorry?" Aisha writes back, "Start with forgiving yourself for waiting so long." And that scroll gets copied again and again, passed through markets, whispered in homes. They call her the woman with ink for scars. She laughs at that, but she starts wearing a blue ink-stained shawl, just for fun. Idris, meanwhile, becomes the man who talks to fig trees. He's caught doing it so often that children begin asking the tree for advice. And one afternoon, a little boy asks, "Did your fig tree always grow this slow?" And Idris answers solemnly, "It used to grow in reverse." Quirky tidbit: there were actual folk tales in parts of the Abbasid Caliphate about trees that only grew backward, shrinking, with each lie told nearby and blossoming. whenever someone spoke the truth. Gardeners were said to plant them near courtrooms. The couple's stories evolved too. Their next scroll collection is titled Things We Meant to Say Sooner. It's raw, less polished, filled with fragments and smudges and unanswered questions. It's their most loved piece yet. Aisha's favorite part is a single entry Idris wrote after one of their rare disagreements. I didn't know how to say sorry, so I cooked dinner and spelled it in lentils. She read it 3 times, then made him eat leftovers just to prove a point. Love, after all, has texture. Historians still argue whether emotional literacy was as openly expressed in domestic life as romanticized accounts suggest. Official records are silent on pillow fights and fig trees, but hundreds of preserved poems speak of affection through food, laughter, and shared silence. Maybe that's all the evidence we need. One quiet morning, Idris wakes first. He boils tea, opens the shutters, kisses her forehead as she sleeps. Then he sits down, ink and parchment ready, and begins a new story. Not about love lost, or pain, or repair, but about a garden that listens, a cat that edits, a woman who stitched stories together without ever needing a needle, and a fig tree that once grew backward until it didn't. And at the very top of the scroll he writes, Dear Aisha, thank you for not leaving when you had every right to. She reads it that evening, says nothing, but leaves a jar of honey by his desk. And the next day she writes back, Dear Idris, thank you for staying when I didn't ask you to. The morning begins with rain, not a dramatic, thunderous affair, just a quiet curtain-like drizzle that makes the rooftops sigh and the fig tree tremble like it's listening for something. Aisha wraps her shawl tighter, peers out the window, and murmurs, Perfect day for not accomplishing anything. Idris, already on his 3rd cup of tea, nods. That's been my plan since sunrise. They move slowly. No scrolls today, no editing, no structured ideas or meaningful goals. Instead, the day stretches lazy and welcome, like an old friend dropping by unannounced. They play a game, writing ridiculous one-line biographies for imaginary neighbors. Farid ibn Farid once ate 6 pears in one sitting and called it divine revelation. Dahlia the basket weaver once turned down a prince because he couldn't spell. Hamad the quiet, possibly a wizard, more likely just introverted. They laugh so hard even the cat gets annoyed and leaves the room. Mainstream fact. Humor writing flourished in parts of the Abbasid Caliphate. Figures like Al-Jahiz and later Al-Tanuki explored satire, irony, and absurdity, not only as entertainment, but as vehicles for social critique and emotional reflection. Rain makes the whole house sound like it's breathing. Soft patter, occasional gusts, the creak of wood that's gotten too comfortable in its age. Aisha sits on the floor, sorting through old notes, and finds one she never showed, Idris, a draft, half poem, half prayer. It begins, May Your next heartbreak, be gentle, and your ink never run dry. She debates reading it aloud. Instead, she hands it over in silence and watches him read. His lips twitch, his brow softens, and when he's done, he simply says, "That's going in the next book." Really, it might be the title. They don't name it that in the end, but the line opens the first page, and readers will underline it, whisper it, copy it into the margins of their lives. Quirky tidbit. Some Abbasid readers kept marginalia diaries, scribbling thoughts, reactions, or quotes in the margins of books they borrowed or bought. In some families, books were passed down with generations of annotations, forming accidental, emotional memoirs. The writing group has grown so much that they now meet in shifts. Some members have begun publishing their own scrolls. Others come just to sit beneath the fig tree and listen. One man arrives weekly and never speaks, but always leaves behind a folded poem tucked into the roots. Tonight he leaves this: some trees grow figs, some grow forgiveness. They leave it untouched, like an offering. Historians still argue whether domestic rituals in early Islamic urban centers were as tender and emotionally intelligent as these scattered records imply. Some say poetry was aspirational, not reflective. Others believe it mirrored daily life, offering a glimpse of quiet resilience. Idris asks Aisha as they clean up after the rain, "If you could write only one more thing, what would it be?" She doesn't pause. "A bedtime story." He nods. "For who?" "For someone who thinks no one remembers them." So they write one. Together, it's simple. It has a goat, and a tree, and a woman who keeps all her broken things in a basket, not to hide them, but to prove they were carried. When it's done, they tuck it into a scroll and send it to Layla's shop with no author's name. That week, 4 people cry while reading it, and one person buys 5 copies for the people I never said sorry to. That night, the rain returns softer this time, like it's found its way home. Aisha lies back, hand resting lightly on Idris's, and whispers, "I wish someone had told me earlier that life after heartbreak isn't the end. It's just quieter and often better." Idris responds, half asleep, "Maybe someone did. Maybe you just hadn't written it yet." And the rain, the fig tree, and even the cat seem to agree. The fig tree flowers, not just the odd shy bloom, but real blossoms, this time soft. Cream petals tucked under deep green leaves, like secrets finally willing to be told. Aisha notices first, standing barefoot in the garden with a cup of tea, gone cold in her hand. She doesn't call for Idris, not right away. She just looks, takes it in. Because sometimes the moment is enough on its own. Eventually, she whispers into the house, "You might want to see this." And Idris appears in the doorway, blinking against the sunlight, hair uncombed, still wrapped in the robe, with the ink-stained hem. He sees, he grins, and then he bows to the fig tree like it's royalty. Mainstream fact. Botanical symbolism was common in Abbasid literature. Fig trees, in particular, appeared in poetry and spiritual texts as emblems of wisdom, patience, and memory. Gardens themselves were often described as metaphors for the inner life. That evening they host the final session of the writing season. There's mint tea and too many sweets. The chairs don't match. Someone plays a wooden flute off-key, but earnestly. The fig tree stands at the center of it all, festooned with little scraps of parchment tied like prayer flags, quotes, questions, jokes, half-written poems. Aisha reads from the newest scroll. "There's no such thing as closure," she said. "There's just distance, and occasionally fig cake." Everyone laughs. A few cry. Idris reads next. "Love doesn't return the same shape it left, but it comes back. Wiser, softer, better at metaphors." Someone claps too early. Someone else drops a biscuit. And the cat, entirely unmoved by the occasion, chooses that moment to leap onto the table and lie down on the centerpiece. Perfect. Quirky tidbit cats were not only common companions in Islamic households, but sometimes featured in writing circles. In certain towns, it was considered good luck for a cat to walk across your poem. During editing, it meant the story would walk well in the world. After the last guest leaves, they sit together under the fig tree one more time. Aisha leans her head on Idris's shoulder. The lantern flickers beside them, casting golden shadows in equal measure. She says, "Remember when I thought divorce meant starting over, alone?" He nods. "You weren't wrong," he says. "You just didn't know how big the world could get after." She closes her eyes. It's quiet now, but it doesn't feel like emptiness anymore. Just space to grow into, he says, and the fig tree in the hush of twilight drops one perfect flower into Aisha's lap. Historians still argue whether stories like these actually happened or whether they're the fictions we tell ourselves to make pain bearable. Some say the scrolls were edited, exaggerated, polished to the point of fantasy. But every now and then, a margin note or a second-hand letter slips through, something small, something quiet, something unmistakably true. Maybe that's all history is. The soft proof that someone lived through it. Aisha and Idris never publish a final book. They leave that scroll unfinished, tucked between two others on the shelf. No title, no dedication, just the words to the one who thought it was over. You were only in the middle. And below that, in Idris's crooked script, save a seat under the fig tree. Always. Now the garden's gone still again. The lantern's burned low, the parchment is rolled, and the stories like sleepy birds have all tucked their heads under quiet wings. You're still there, of course, just outside the frame, just close enough to feel the air shift. The night has softened everything, the corners, the sounds, even the shadows. There's no crowd left now, just you, and maybe that's what you needed all along. The fig tree doesn't ask anything of you. It just stands,
steady, blooming anyway, like patience made visible. You close your eyes and imagine the ink drying on the last line of a letter never sent. You imagine Aisha's voice, low and warm, whispering from the past. You're not alone in this chapter, just quiet. That's different. Breathe in. Let the day dissolve like parchment in rain. You've made it through every kind of silence. Now finally, here comes the sleep. Soft, long, and deserved.